Hello there. Thank you for tuning into this training session for Borderless Classroom. So today we're going to be going through the features, functionality, ways that Borderless Classroom can be used, and I want to get started with how to get the extension opened up. So the first thing that you're going to need to assure is that when you get into Google Chrome, what we'll have here is just your regular old normal tab. Just got to make sure that you're signed into your Chrome profile, and that's going to be with your school account. When you're signed in with that school account, just make sure that sync is turned on here, because sometimes if that's turned off, it might, emphasis on might, make the the extension not appear. So we're going to want to make sure that account is looking good. Then you'll be able to hop into your appropriate extensions here. And then what you're looking for is Aristotle Educator. Now, if you'd like, what I recommend is pinning that to your taskbar just by clicking that little button right there. Give it some easier access for when you want to get it open. Now, another way to get the extension opened up here is if you're on a regular old page on the internet, we can simply come down here, give our right mouse a click, and then we're going to be able to open up our dashboard simply by clicking that button. With one of those three options, that's going to have the dashboard opened up for you here so you can start seeing your classes. When you get this started, you should already see classes populated here. Hopefully going to be able to work with your tech department so they were able to sync rosters and essentially take care of this for you. But if you happen to have any classes existing within Google Classroom, you're going to have the ability to sync those classes right into here if you need to. Just click that button right there. Classes will appear for you. You can sync it just by clicking that button. Now, with those two options taken care of, you might want to create a class yourself. If you want to do it on your own, more power to you. You can always do that just by clicking this button right here. All you're going to have to do is select a few different options here. First is a name. That's only going to be visible to you and anybody with administrative access to the software. So essentially, I'd recommend just making it something that's easy to remember, something that's going to point out to you so you know to click that one at the appropriate time. And then the class ID is going to be something your students can use to enter in the classroom manually if you would like them to. With the default setting, we're going to be able to pull them into classes automatically, but that is there for you if you would like to go about it in that fashion. So again, I'd recommend just making it something easy for your students to remember. And then with the rostering type, we have two different options, either user or computer. 99.9% of the time, I recommend keeping it on user. And the reason for that is this roster type is going to be focused on when you're adding or deleting students from the classroom. To add a student in when that's set to user there, you're only going to need their username. If it's set to computer, you need that whole more complicated device ID. So if you have a preference, go for it. But personally, I find user to be a whole lot easier. Now, class length is here for you to set if you happen to know how long you would like for that class to go for, but that is totally optional. We're going to have a few different ways to get classes going for certain periods of time that I'm hoping to cover in just a second here. Depending on which class you have when you're ready to get started into one here, you can jump into that class's dashboard once you approach that classroom there once you enter in. From here, we want to give you all the tools that you would need to perform any actions you might want to in your standard class setting. This could be lecturing, this could be administering tests, things of that nature. Also wants you to see what's on student screens, wants you to be able to see what's open in their browser. What do they have open? Do we need to close or block distracting websites? Do we need to send students over to the right material? All these things are all going to be unlocked for you as soon as you have some time going in a class session. Now, getting into the settings here, we're going to be covering what all of these things do, but I want to get started here with the class schedule. And the class schedule is going to be available for you to set some scheduled hours for each particular classroom that you have. So if this is a first hour block of the day, you know it's going to be from 8 o'clock to 8:55. Go ahead and set those times of the day right here. Then as soon as the clock strikes 8, session will get started for you automatically. Now, otherwise, if you want to get a session started by yourself, all you have to do is hover over this tab right here. Pick from one of these set minute lengths to have that lecture going for that long, or that session, I should say. Last option here lets you enter in a custom minute value, just in case you think that would suit your preferences a little bit better. Regardless of how you decide to get things started, when you start a session, students are going to be brought into the classroom right away, and you're going to be able to start seeing their screens and what they're getting up to. And when it comes to that default class length that we saw earlier, this right here, if you have that set, all you're going to have to do is come into a classroom here, click the Start Session button. You're not going to have that tab. It's going to know to go for that length each time. So all I'm going to mention is when, like I said before, that session does begin for you, this is the point where you'd be able to go, click on a student's tile, see their screen, see what they're getting up to. And I did want to note that from a student's perspective, there is no login process. There's no buttons they have to push, things they have to type in. Instead, you're going to be able to pull them into your classroom here. Right away, you're going to be able to see what they're getting up to, even though from their perspective, things look exactly the same. Now, one of the first ways that we want you to be able to use this is for distraction monitoring. So if we see a student looking for some games instead of doing their homework, we can jump over here to the tabs feature, see everything they have open in that browser of theirs, take an unblock game search, simply close it from their browser by clicking that button right there. Now, getting into a different example, let's say we have a student temporarily getting distracted, simply going through some YouTube videos here so we see what they're doing. Let's say we find something educational, something productive, maybe the class material or something like Quizlet, something we want them to be studying. The refocus button here is going to pull the student right over to that material for us. So if we see students getting some of the right things done, that's one of the ways to get them on task. But if we run into a situation like this here, where refocus doesn't really do you any favors because pulling a student over to ESPN just doesn't really work out for you, we want you to be able to enter in a website of choice into this URL bar right here, open up a new tab for that student, send them right over in that direction. So if you ever have to get students on task on your own, send them over to class material by yourself. That's one of the ways we want you to be able to get that done here. Now, when it comes to the tiles, I feel like those can be good for individual student monitoring, seeing which students are getting distracted on that personal basis and getting them over to the class material on a very one-at-a-time kind of spectrum. But if we want to do it for the whole class at once, that's where these two features come into play. So starting with the activity feed, what we're going to have here is a bird's eye view into all the different ways that students have accessed the internet while they're in this class session with you. Anytime they've opened up a new tab, gone to a new website, try to access something new, you're going to be able to see it here. So as an educator, if you ever have to leave your desk or address the needs of a student, if you ever need to essentially take your eyes away from this screen for a second here, we're going to be able to scroll through and see everything that's happened in chronological order. And if students are trying to pull any fast ones on you, get to places they're not supposed to be going to, you can block that website for that individual student, you can block that website for the whole class, or you can choose to close tabs right from here. Now, one of the ways you want this to be usable for you is if you're taking a look at this screen here, anything negative pops up for you in real time, you can take care of that in the same way with those exact same features that you saw. Now, tab management, on the other hand, this is going to be what I like to call mission control of the classroom. And I call it that because we're going to be able to see everything that students have open in their browsers, and we're going to be able to see the number of students who are on those tabs at any given time here. So the first thing we're going to be able to do from here is close tabs in bulk with this little red X here. This is our close tab for everyone feature. So if there's 30 students in class here, 15 of them are on YouTube. Personally, I just don't have a lot of use for that activity right now. I can give that red X a click. YouTube is now closed for all 15 of those students. And we want you to be able to go through here and take care of anything you find distracting, anything you find unnecessary. Click through this list here, remove what you don't like. Now, if you run into a situation where websites are more problematic and you don't want students to get there for any reason, we have this button in the middle here that will allow you to block that website for the classroom. It'll work the exact same way as that block for all feature that you saw. And then when that's taken care of, all the students who had Amazon open, they're going to be met with this block page right here. Anybody else in the class who tries to get to Amazon, they're going to be met with the same fate. Now, taking the focus away from tab management for just a second, don't mean for this to be confusing, but I want to talk about this website filter that we have here real quick. Because what we'll see is that when I use one of those block for everybody features, it made that addition automatically. Now, this is an in-class filter that each educator can use to suit their preferences best, really on whatever those might be. So on the administrative side of the software, the administrative filter that's applying to all of your students, let's say that ESPN happens to be allowed. And personally, students are looking at fantasy scores a little bit too much for your liking. So you can come in here, you can block ESPN, and that says, while students are in class with me, they are not allowed to go to that website or any other websites you choose to include in here. We also have the option of allowing websites. So if you're ever in a pinch, if you end up in a situation where one of your students is a part of a stricter set of rules on the internet, and maybe they are being blocked from the class material for that day, you can come in here. You can allow access to that website, grant the student that access without calling the IT department, having them figure out how to get that student there. You have full ability to do that on your own. We're going to be able to take that functionality right over here to the individual basis with each student tile. If you maybe have to block YouTube for one particular student who's having a lot of trouble with it, or you may run into a situation where only one of your students is a part of that stricter setting, so you got to allow it just for them. What I can tell you is, if you decide to throw some things in here, these are going to reset at the end of the class session, which can promote students maybe learning their lesson there, or if you're using this allowed website section as more of a reward, letting certain students play some games for a little bit, or take a break during the last 5-10 minutes of class, that's not going to be advantageous for them the next time that class session runs around. But what we'll have here with the website filter, the one that's class-wide, These settings are going to stay saved to the classroom itself. So I'll enter an ESPN one more time. I'll save those changes. Now, anytime students are in this class with me, Amazon, ESPN are totally inaccessible unless I went inside there and I decided to change something myself. Now, lastly, with the feature we have here in tab management, this is going to be our send everyone to site feature. So using this Wikipedia article as an example of what I want my students to see, what I want them to be getting up to, we have Jerry here. He is the student who has that tab open. And what I can see here is that when I click this button, or at least I can tell you that he was getting distracted. Sorry, my brain froze up a little bit there. Didn't mean for that to happen. But when I click that button there, the first thing that's going to happen, it's going to pull Jerry right over to that material for me. It's going to work very similar to that refocus feature that you saw. And then it's going to open up a new tab for the rest of my students, and it's going to send them right over in that direction. So the main goal of that feature is if you see at least one of your students getting some of the right things done here, you'll be a click away from getting everybody else on task as well. And if you run into a situation where you see nothing but distractions in here, I want you to be able to reference this open tab feature up top. This will work for the whole class at once. So with whatever website you choose to enter in here, you can send all of your students right over in that direction if you ever have to. With these features taken care of, the next thing I wanted to talk about was this toolbar here and the ways we're going to be able to use these tools individually. So what we'll have here with multi-select is the ability to pick and choose whatever students you want any of these tools to apply for here. If you're not selecting any students, the default setting is they'll apply to everybody at the same time. But maybe Kramer and Jerry here, they're getting distracted. Everybody else is getting their work done, no problem. So I'll send just the two of them over to the class material. Heads up, what this is going to be here is a way to blank student screens, essentially not giving them any options to do anything besides pay attention to you or have eyes on you if they're on site or stay away from distractions if they happen to be working remotely. Screens are going to appear totally blank for students. They can move their mouse around on there, but they can't open anything up. They can't type anything in. Really, they can't use their device at all until you choose to turn that off there. And if you'd like, you can throw a message in there, maybe addressing to your students why that device control was taken away. Now send a message here. This is going to be usable for some quick class-wide announcements. I'm going to use Kramer here just because if I did it with everybody, you'd see four of the same message pop up here. Just want to use this as an example. Just a quick little pop-up message that students can close out of right away. So for maybe non-essential information or things you want to update students on quick, I feel like that can be a good feature to use. Now, next with Start a Test, I feel like this is one of the more important features we have in the software, so I want to get into it with a little more detail here. What we'll have for starters when it comes to testing is a kiosk mode that you can select. This essentially dictates how tests appear for students on their devices, how they're going to be able to interact with them. Starting with the kiosk option, that is our lockdown browser. So with whatever website that you choose to enter in here, that's going to be pulled up through a window within our extension. So students aren't going to be able to close out of that window, minimize out of that window, or click anything that's not test related, because if they happen to try, they're going to be brought back to that testing window time and time again. Now, full browser, on the other hand, that's going to be available for any open note, open book test that you want students getting into, as this will bring the test up within a tab in your student's browser, and it'll give them the ability to access other resources on the internet if you choose to allow them here. And the way that we want to give you that control is through an outline, which is a separate tool located right over here. So outlines are essentially rules for content if you already have an idea for where you want your students to be, and it does not have to be test specific. If you wanted to, you could create an outline where the only allowed website students could get to were the sources for a research project, or the only website you knew you were using for class that day. Essentially is here for you to monitor distractions, limit them so students are only getting to the places that you approve of here. And now when it comes to testing, we found it to be useful to create an outline where the only allowed sources are the test itself and then any other resources that you want students to get into. That way you can know for sure students aren't able to cheat. They're not able to access any information that you haven't specifically allowed yourself here. And under that, we have some tab control that you can set. So if you'd like, let's say we have a test and then 2 resources, we could set that tab limit to 3. That way we can know for sure students aren't even going to have the opportunity to try and open up something else, go somewhere that's going to lead to them being blocked because that tab limit is put in place here. And then we have the option of having all tabs close when you apply one of these outlines to make sure that students aren't looking at any material they had open on their device before that outline was applied to them. And when it comes to testing, you'll see here that we have that exact same feature available unless we come in, take this little drop-down menu here, pick an outline with that same setting, gets rid of it because it's being taken care of in the exact same way there. And then you can select a student close action. Personally, I recommend keeping it on reopen test, as that goes along with that example I was telling you about. If you're in kiosk mode here, student tries to close out of the window, doesn't really matter, no harm done, they get brought right back. Otherwise, if you do want to put a little more responsibility into your students' hands, we have these two options here, which either grant access to the device or just pull up a blank screen until you decide to end that testing mode there. When all your preferences are set, just go ahead and click that start testing mode there. Your students are going to be locked down in the places where you decided it's okay for them to be. Now, next, what we'll have here with share a screen is, as the name implies, let your students get a look at whatever is on your device or whatever is on a particular student's device. I think this can be great for showing an example, showing students maybe where they need to go, what links they need to follow for any classes that they might be in. But if you'd like to speak and also present along with whatever material is on your device here, that's where our lecturing options can come into play. And I want to get into those in just a bit here. But the last feature that we had to talk about here in the toolbar is releasing students. And I think that this is the best time to talk about the student extension and what students are going to be able to do through it. So with one of my test users here, went up and pulled that extension right up here. So all students are going to be able to do is send you chat messages. So I'm going to go ahead and say hello. What we'll see here from Newman's perspective, as soon as I send that message in, the outline of his tile, is going to turn red, just to give you a quick notification, show you they sent something your way. All I'm going to have to do to check that out is click on that tile. It'll pull me right over to the chat section, so I can go ahead and say something right back to him. It can be good for answering questions, making sure you and your students are doing good. Everything is making sense to them. Now, with release students here, one thing that you might have noticed is that the leave class button here is totally unavailable. I can click on it as many times as I want, but I'm still in the classroom here. I'm not going anywhere. And the reason for that is because there's still some time left on the clock here. As soon as that minutes remaining count reaches 0, students will have the ability to leave, but not while there's still time left. They're going to be locked in here. Unless you want to make that happen a little bit faster, you have the option of manually coming in here and releasing some of your students. So I'll go ahead and do it with Jerry here. I'll click release students for him. I'll pull up his extension on my screen here. Now I'm going to see that leave class button that we were looking at earlier. That becomes red and available. So students can leave if you give them the opportunity to. And now what we'll see here is the tile notifies you, hey, the student now went their separate ways from you. But if this happened to be a mistake, should you want to bring the student back into the class for whatever reason, all you're going to have to do is put a little more time on the clock here. Get another session started. It'll pull those students back into the classroom that exact same way it worked before. Alrighty, and then one thing that I realized I forgot to mention, just thinking about testing there, considering that releasing your students early can sometimes go right along with that. If you're taking a test, that might be the only curriculum you have for the day. When that testing mode is live, you can use multi-select here to take individual students out of that lockdown. All you have to do is select them, click start a test here one more time. It'll say end testing mode instead while that's active, and that gives them the ability to be taken out of the lockdown browser. And then you have the ability to let them go, just like that. All right, and if we're feeling good there, the next thing I wanted to talk about was these lecturing options that we were previously mentioned, ways we're going to be able to present information to students and make sure they're following along with everything okay. So for starters, what we're going to have here is a live lecture. This is going to be more of a one-sided approach to presenting information. As an educator, you can share your screen, you can share your microphone, share your camera, or a combination of the three. But as a student, you do not have those same capabilities. So a student can't turn their microphone on and try to interrupt whatever it is you want to present about here. So from your point of view as an educator, it's going to be a little bit more like a webinar. And to give you an idea for what that looks like, I want to get one of these started here. What I'll see when I share my screen will have a couple different options, either showing students everything that's on my device, if you have any other softwares that you want to use in correspondence with some material, just a particular application, or a singular tab in Google Chrome. If you happen to have a preference, that's the one that we want you going with. When you share your screen here, your students are going to be met with this window that lets them know the lecture is beginning. And I can tell you that because of how my demo environment is put together, these are showing up in the teacher's point of view, and normally that is not the case. So normally, the dashboard is always going to be open for you here as an educator. You can come in, you can shrink this down, you can minimize it, you can maximize it, control it, monitor how you want to monitor things. One thing I can mention, now that you'll see all of a sudden these things are taken away, I promise you that is quite all right. All you have to do is click this toggle feed switch. It gets brought right back up for you. Also takes it away should you ever want a little more space to look at things here. Now, when it comes to presenting that info, what we're going to have here is this same window that you saw earlier. Once I click on that button there, we're going to be able to start seeing the educator's screen, whatever information we're supposed to follow along with, and the educator is going to appear for students right in the bottom right corner. So if students do happen to have any questions, they can use the educator as a resource simply by raising their hand. Click on that button. This pulls them over to a menu where they can ask whatever it is they want to know. As soon as the student submits that question for you, you're going to see that pop up for you right down here. You're going to be able to spot that in the bottom right corner of the screen. So when you answer that question by clicking that button there, you can simply type your answer in here. You'll have the option of responding to that student who asked you the question. Or if you read this and you think to yourself, this is something that all of my students could benefit from knowing, you can respond to the entire class instead. Now, when you choose to do that, your students are going to be met with this notification here. It's going to let them know the educator answered something new. Students can take a look at that through their class Q&A. This is going to be a list of everything that you as an educator have decided to answer for them so far. All a student has to do to get the answer to a question is give it a click, and the answer will pop up right under it. If you only answered directly to that student who asked the question, they're the only people who would be seeing it within their respective class Q&A. Now, if you choose to answer questions for the whole class, it's going to remain totally anonymous. So students aren't going to be able to see which students are asking which questions or thinking, why did that student ask that question, getting distracted by anything like that. Instead, we only want you to be able to see that information that you want to share with them. And now I can say that if you ever wanted to record your lecture, all you're going to have to do is click that start recording switch right there. That can be done in the middle of while that lecture is being presented. Or if you want to get the whole thing, just make sure that it's being recorded by clicking that switch right there. Then as soon as you click that stop live lecture button like I just did, it will start to compile for you automatically. You're either going to be able to upload that lecture right to your device or right to Google Drive if you want students to be able to watch that later on. Essentially, have it so maybe students who are absent from class that day can still get that material there. It'll still be available. Now, live conference, on the other hand, this is going to be a little bit different as it's our take on Zoom, Google Meet, Microsoft Teams, more of your traditional web call type of software, if any of your educators happen to be a little more familiar with using that. To start things off here, we're going to have that multi-select feature. This is going to let you pick and choose the students that you want to get into any of these meetings here. What we'll be able to do for starters is get a one-on-one conference going with students. We could select their profile, go ahead and give that conference a name, or we can simply click that little camera icon that you see here in the tile. That's going to get a one-on-one conference with that student in the exact same way here. And speaking of those meeting windows, we can talk about that. So depending on who you select here, when you decide to get a conference started, students are going to be met with one of these windows right here that allow them to enable their microphone, their camera, or a combination of the two. And to me, this is the largest difference between these two features because a student is going to be able to share their own media. They're going to be able to ask you these questions. They're going to be able to chime in with you, collaborate with you as you go along. I think I might have said chime in twice, so thanks for bearing with me. It's been a little bit of a long day, but that's all right. So getting into what it looks like from more of a lecture-driven perspective, we can use the Select All Students feature here, and then we're going to be able to have everybody in the class included so that when we give that conference a name, all those students get met with that window. They can set their preferences. They can hop in here. What we're going to see is more room on the screen accommodated for each student who's participating. So if this is more of an environment for students to work together, maybe this is a breakout room or some kind of group project, we want students to be able to see everything that's going on here. So the student, we can hop in, we can share our camera. Looks like this is the teacher point of view. Pardon me, let's get the student point of view up. There we go. So I'm going to be able to hop in here. We can talk about questions. We can talk about lecturing information, really do whatever it is students are supposed to be doing. Students are also going to be able to share their screens from this feature. So if they ever have a presentation they're supposed to give, or if they ever have some problems they do really well, any information you want to share with the whole class, they'll be able to do that from here, no problem. Looks like that's freezing up. What a flattering image that is. But what we're going to have here from the education perspective, test system's giving me a little trouble, so I'm sorry about that to anybody watching here, but normally what you're going to be seeing is these speaker icons here in front of all of your students' tiles. Gives you the ability to quick mute students if background noise is coming in, or maybe they're just causing a little bit too much trouble for you. All you have to do is give that button a click. That's going to be coming to a stop. Also, if we're going off of that presentation example, you could let Jerry speak here as the presenter. You could mute the rest of your students until there's questions at the end or things like that. Now, as an educator, we can share our screens, our cameras, our microphones, just like live lecturing. So I could pull up that YouTube video in the exact same way. Differences here would be able to see our students at the bottom part of the screen. If their cameras are turned on, they could raise their hand for you, or if their audio is enabled, they can simply ask questions through their voice instead of typing them in there. Like I've mentioned a few times now, live conferencing is all about that collaboration and more of that two-sided approach to presenting the info here. Now, going with those breakout rooms that I mentioned, wanted to give a quick idea what those are going to look like. So I can select these two students here. I can put them into room 1. And then after that, I'll take my other 2 students and I'll put them into room 2. And then I want to talk about the student point of view for just a second, because it's likely going to be their expectation to either jump in between a lecture or jump into a breakout room, whenever they're told to. To get that done, all they're going to have to do is hover over this Borderless Classroom window within their taskbar so they can go in between the two whenever you want. And then all the conferences you have live as an educator are going to show up for you right down here in the bottom right corner of the screen. It's going to include the number of students who are in each meeting here and the names that we've given each meeting as well. So if you ever feel like jumping in, seeing how things are going with a particular group, the join button is available to do just that. Gives you a brand new window, lets you set your preferences, hop into that meeting, and then of course make sure that everything is going okay. Now, if you're ready to end that conference, all you're going to have to do is click that end button right there, and then the conference is going to close for everybody who's a part of it. So this is not going to be a link or a chat room that students can hang out in for as long as they feel the need here. Instead, you're going to have total control over when those conferences start. You're going to have total control over when they finish. Now, when it comes to these 2 features, everything else that you've seen today is still going to be available. So if you're lecturing or conferencing, you can always click on a student's tile, make sure they have that window open, And then if you do see that they're on the internet, and they're maybe getting into some things they shouldn't be getting into, you can close their tabs. You can do the same thing through tab management and the activity feed. You can apply a restrictive outline if you wanted to have some of that control while you're lecturing, anything else that you've seen. But when it comes to live conferencing, where this can be a little bit different is you can have a meeting going with all of your students, and if they have their cameras turned on, you can have that conference going while a test is being administered. And that's how we offer remote proctoring across any number of networks, any number of situations. So whether students are on site, remote, any situation in between, we still want you to be able to assure that your students are getting their work done. And now that these features are taken care of, I wanted to get into the class settings and get into a few other things that you're going to be able to do here. So for starters, we have an enrollment type. This essentially dictates, do you pull students into the classroom automatically or do you have students join manually? If that enrollment type is set to closed, that's where that class ID comes into play, because they can open their extension, type that class ID in, and then you can decide, do we let the student join in or do we deny that access? Open, on the other hand, simply says, session is started, let's get going. Now, under that, we have a tab limit that you can set similar to the outlines. It's going to be on a class-wide spectrum here. If you decide anything more than 5 tabs at any given time might be a bit excessive, just as an example. There's some email reports that you can have sent your way. One that's based on attendance, shows you when students hopped into the class, how long they were in the class for, and a report based on activity, give you an idea for all the websites your students have been visiting, total amount of time spent on those websites as well. Under that, we have the class list. This is where you add or delete students from the classroom. So if you want to make a class on your own, you can come in here. If that roster type is set to user, this is where you'd be able to add students in just based on their username. And then if it was based on computer, it would be that ID like we were talking about. And then under that, we have the schedule that we saw earlier. And then we have co-teachers. This is going to give you the ability to add up to 5 personnel into your classroom. It can be good for substitutes, principals, administrators, or anybody who specializes in helping students with special needs. If you have a student in here who needs a little extra guidance, co-teacher is going to be able to come in here, work with that student, start a one-on-one conference, open up websites for them, take care of those needs so you can still do what you need to do. And then down there, I believe that is it. We have some class notes that you can create if you would like to, just some little anecdotes. And then we're going to have a block list you can set, or at least take a look at students who you decided you cannot come in here for behavior reasons or anything that might fall along that spectrum there. So what we're going to have outside of each respective classroom here is this feature called historical reports. This is going to give you those email and activity reports that we were talking about. You can still have those sent to you through an email if you want to. Personally, I think this is a little bit of a better option. And the reason for that is because with this calendar here, you can pick any given day. You can see all the classes that you ran for that day. When you pick a particular class, you can see that class's attendance, pick it to a certain student here, same idea as before, get an idea for all the places that they've been. So you're going to be able to see your attendance right through here instead of having that be one particular report. And then you can see all their activity right next to it instead of having that in a separate report here. And if you run into situations where distractions are coming up, students are going to places they maybe shouldn't be going to, we want this data to be in front of you so you can send that to parents, you can send that to your tech department, you can address that however you might like to here. And come to think of things, if I'm not mistaken, that is everything that I was hoping to cover today. So for whoever is watching, thank you very much for your time and for getting a little more familiar with the system. Did want to mention here that this help section is available should you ever want a little more information on everything that we've discussed today. This is going to be very similar to this training session. It's just going to be done through the approach of articles and some short video summaries if that's how you prefer to learn things here. But again, thank you very much. Have a great day, week, year, what have you, and take care.